a presentation of South Carolina ETV, made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Funds for this program were provided by the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation and the Literature Program of the National Endowment for the Arts.
I am summoned from my bed to the great city of the dead, where I have no house or home, but in dreams may sometime roam, looking for my ancient room, a feeling in my heart of doom, where grandmother aged lies on her couch of later days, and my mother, saner than I, laughs and cries, she's still alive.
The Lower East Side, New York City. For 30 years, Allen Ginsberg has lived here among the bodegas and the street people, the artists and the immigrants. In a cluttered, low-rent apartment, Ginsberg struggles with the rambling lines of Whitman, the plain speech of William Carlos Williams, and the surreal imagery of Blake to create his own unique poem of America. In the 1950s, Allen Ginsberg was one of a circle of writers known as the Beats, intellectual hipsters of the bebop era. Writers such as Jack Kerouac, William Burroughs, Gregory Corso, Lawrence Ferlinghetti. With their experiments in language and lifestyle, Ginsberg and these original beat writers influenced an American generation. With the publication of his collected poems in 1985 and his sequel to Kaddish, White Shroud, Ginsberg remains a vital force in American letters. His most famous poem is Howl, a counterculture manifesto Ginsberg wrote in San Francisco in 1955. But his masterpiece came later, Kaddish, about his insane mother Naomi, who died in 1956.
Behind that also, there's still unresolved a certain guilt at having not been able to take care of her properly when she was alive, and having in fact been the one to have to sign the papers for a lobotomy after the doctors at Pilgrim State Hospitals warned me that she would have a stroke and perhaps perish unless something were done to cut the emotional torrent.
So in this piece of writing, was that also a result of a visitation from your mother in a dream?
No, not at all. That was a result of a night up listening to Ray Charles and reading the rhythms of the Kaddish in an old Hebrew book that a friend gave me, and a big shot of methamphetamine. Coming home from Hoboken at dawn and sitting down at my desk full of energy and saying, well, I'll write a little bit about my mother now, and then sitting down and continuing writing till noon and through that afternoon and all night long and up to the next afternoon, one big long session with pen on typewriter paper. And getting, like with amphetamine, getting a little disjointed at the end, like not knowing where all the parts were, but not going back, just going forward. Kaddish, Part 3. Only to have not forgotten the beginning in which she drank cheap sodas in the morgues of Newark. Only to have seen her weeping on gray tables in long wards of her universe. Only to have known the weird ideas of Hitler at the door, the wires in her head, the 3 big sticks rammed down her back, the voices in the ceiling shrieking out her ugly early lays for 30 years, only to have seen the time jumps, memory lapse, the crash of wars, the roar and silence of a vast electric shock, only to have seen her painting crude pictures of elevateds running over the rooftops of the Bronx, her brothers dead in Riverside or Russia, her lone in Long Island writing a last letter, and her image in the sunlight at the window. The key is in the window. The key is in the sunlight at the window in the bars. The key is in the sunlight. Only to have come to that dark night on Iron Bed by Stroke when the sun gone down on Long Island, and the vast Atlantic roars outside, the great call of being to its own, to come back out of the nightmare. Divided creation, with her head lain on a pillow of the hospital to die, in one last glimpse, all earth one everlasting light in the familiar blackout. No tears for this vision, but that the key should be left behind, at the window, the key in the sunlight, to the living that can take that slice of light in hand and turn the door and look back, see creation glistening backwards to the same grave, size of universe, size of the tick of the hospital's clock on the archway over the white door. The section, Oh Mother, What Have I Forgotten, that was done in Paris. And then when I got home to New York, I realized I haven't written my mother's story, and I might as well write it. But I was thinking of it as a story rather than a poem, but then it came out so intense that it was a 25, 30-page narrative poem, sort of like Rimbaud's prose poems. Oh, Mother, what have I left out? Oh, Mother, what have I forgotten? Oh, Mother, farewell with a long black shoe. Farewell with Communist Party and a broken stocking. Farewell with 6 dark hairs on the wen of your breast. Farewell with your old dress and a long black beard around the vagina. Farewell with your sagging belly, with your fear of Hitler, with your mouth of bad short stories, with your fingers of rotten mandolins, with your arms of fat Patterson porches, with your belly of strikes and smokestacks, with your chin of Trotsky and the Spanish Civil War, with your voice singing for the decaying, over-broken workers, with your nose of bad lay, with your nose of the smell of the pickles of Newark, with your eyes of Russia, with your eyes of no money, with your eyes of false China, with your eyes of Aunt Eleanor in an oxygen tent, with your eyes of starving India, with your eyes pissing in the park, with your eyes of America taking a fall, with your eyes of your failure at the piano, with your eyes of your relatives in California, with your eyes of Ma Rainey dying in an ambulance, with your eyes of Czechoslovakia attacked by robots, with your eyes going to painting class at night in the Bronx, with your eyes of the killer grandma you see on the fire escape from the horizon, with your eyes running naked out of the apartment screaming into the hall, with your eyes being led away by policemen to an ambulance, with your eyes strapped down on the operating table, with your eyes of the pancreas removed, with your eyes of appendix operation, with your eyes of abortion, with your eyes of ovaries removed, with your eyes of shock, with your eyes of lobotomy, with your eyes of divorce, with your eyes of stroke, with your eyes alone, with your eyes, with your eyes, with your death full of flowers.
Allen Ginsberg was born in 1926 in Paterson, New Jersey, the son of Naomi and Louis Ginsberg, a high school teacher and himself a lyric poet. His father introduced him to poetry, but the younger Ginsberg didn't take himself seriously as a writer until he was a freshman at Columbia University, where he met Jack Kerouac.
And he was a writer, as I'd never met before, someone who was a full-time writer. Not like my father, a school teacher and writer, but Kerouac was like an old-fashioned, sacred, heart-dedicated artist.
So when did you commit yourself to becoming a writer? I imagine your parents were more pleased with your brother, who became a lawyer.
More or less, but I was sort of committed myself internally when I met Kerouac and Burroughs in 1944-45. Because they made such a spiritual impression on me that I realized this is a quality I hadn't met in my life before, except maybe in my mother's madness. Except theirs was sane. It's the same intensity, but sane and balanced and dedicated to creation and humor and satire and perception and insight into politics, as well as insight into my particular virtues and intelligence and shyness.
And how did you break the traditions that we all started out with? I mean, the poetry you talked about reading and being immersed in as a young person.
I mean, you really came out with your own voice that was unique and apart.
More or less of an accident. I wasn't looking for a voice particularly. I was just trying to write poems, mostly imitating the verse that I'd known through my father. Though Kerouac's prose, even at that time, before he published The Town and the City, his first novel, was beginning to accumulate, and it had a great power and melody. And he turned me on to Thomas Wolfe. And we both read Dostoevsky, so we had that kind of vision of a spiritual world. And read Whitman's first spiritual world, and Blake. Burroughs educated me quite a bit, and Kerouac too. But it was mostly their character that I began understanding and sympathizing with and empathizing with and wanting to be like, which was total dedication to sacred world and interest in the nature of consciousness itself. Interest in some kind of new vision or supreme reality was what we called it in 1945. Kerouac's word was new vision, which I think he got out of Rimbaud. I think it's a line in Rimbaud, Season in Hell, that says, "When shall we arrive at last to be the first to greet Christmas on earth?" So, you know, a new world or something. So we had some kind of spiritual desire, which was not very well defined. But Kerouac was beginning to write much more spontaneously than me, and I was just writing these sort of rigid little imitative forms, though a little sophisticated, because in college I'd been reading Wyatt, Marvell, Donne, Milton, Shakespeare, Lord Brooke, Fulk Greville, Philip Sidney, and Campion. So I was getting a better ear and imitating their work, imitating the Elizabethan and metaphysical 17th century poetry. And Christopher Smart, who wrote long lines like Whitman, was a great big influence. But Kerouac was forging ahead on his own into a whole new area of spontaneous writing, of burning his bridges behind him and notating the procession of thought in his mind directly on the paper without the idea of going back over the bridge and revising it, but burning his bridge behind him and saying, here I am on the other shore. Whatever I write is what I thought while I was writing, and I can't change what I thought while I was writing, so how can I change the writing? I think he was interested in the flow of consciousness and the flow of feeling and the accuracy of instant by instant recording of what was flashing through his mind. And he had very great techniques for doing it because he was a 120 word a minute speed typist, so he could write as fast as think. And also he somehow self-made discoveries of, like, don't stop to think of the words, but to see the picture better, which is a line in his instructions for modern prose. So I began learning from him, but I kept journals because he kept journals and other friends kept journals. And then when I went to visit Williams after that, I sent him some poems, and they weren't very good. I sent him the old style poems, and he wrote back, well, in this mode, perfection is basic. These aren't perfect. So then I went back through my journals, like these, where I wrote little things down, and I found a few phrases or sentences or maybe a whole paragraph that made common sense from New Jersey. So I broke those up into lines like Williams, experimenting with measuring the lines out and balancing them and the relative weight or the relative measure of the lines, just taking the prose and chopping it up into verse lines. A couple little things like, I feel like I am at a dead end and so finished. All spiritual facts I realize are true, but right now, I don't know, I have no hope and I'm tired. Or the alleys, the dye work, Mill Street in the smoke, Negroes climbing by rusted iron by the river, all the pictures we carry in our head, depression and class consciousness of the 30s. So I just broke those up into little lines and sent it to him, about 6, 7 poems. He wrote me back a letter saying, this is it, or these are it. Do you have any more of these? I shall see that you get a book. And I realized that simply by paying attention to his style, I had the natural stuff that I wrote was more important and interesting and real than the poetry I wrote. And when I was trying to get it arty and poetic, it just sort of was all uninteresting and bullshit, basically. Whereas what I wrote down, just thoughts in my head from things I'd seen, and native thoughts or primordial thoughts or you know, just what I thought ordinarily, those were my original things. Those were my original writings, not the imitations of poetry. And Carol was saying, well, of course. Everybody's interested in what you're really interested in, not in you're just trying to artificially create a poem. I mean, just creating a poem artificially is like egotism compared to just reflecting what you're really thinking. So I sort of discovered my own nature that way, encouraged by Williams and encouraged by Kerouac. But basically my poetry is just an extension of Kerouac's.
Tell me about the so-called beat generation. I mean, in the late 40s and early 50s, what sort of life were you living then?
You know, there was no beat generation, it was just friends. We were living together on and off, or seeing each other often. There was this sense of sacred comradeship in art. We wrote about each other. I wrote a lot about Neil Cassidy, as did Kerouac, and he wrote many novels in which he described the ordinary events, adventures, and misalliances and sorrows and odd epiphanies of the day, the epiphanies of the day, of the days, of the months, of the years in that time. I was much less productive than he and sort of more tight-assed about writing and much more uncertain. And carried a camera also, and so had this sense of sacred company, and so took photographs of Kerouac and Burroughs and later Gregory Corso and later Peter Orlovsky, and just kept a kind of household snapshot record without any particular motive or intention, except I knew they were immortal, so I thought I'd better take pictures of the immortals while they were still mortal.
And Kerouac in On the Road describes a fast-paced, burning life.
Well, that's his lyricism. The life itself was not that fast-paced and burning. It was his attitude and his appreciation of it that was fast-paced and burning. The life we lived was, I suppose, the same as anybody living now, any of the punk or new wave kids, you know, traveling and having friends and going out and staying out late at night and doing whatever grass they do, or experimenting sexually or socially. It was simply that Kerouac had an appreciation of the drama of that and a respect for the people that he loved and dealt with. Neil Cassidy was sort of remarkable as both for his energy and his wisdom and his humor and his sexual ambience and prowess and generosity. Kerouac was not particularly a speedy Roman candle himself. Internally, spiritually he was, but he was just a very handsome, beautiful-looking, intelligent-faced, very intelligent and wise young man, totally dedicated to his art and with a sacred sense of this is the one mortal world we're in, and this is the one and only chance to write it like a Bible. I would say that of this book, which is collected poems, probably 2/3 is written late in the evening or early morning before going to bed or on waking up or in the middle of the night. The key there is when the Muse calls, answer. Even if you have to wake up in the middle of the night with some image in your head like that red-hosed snake, computer intelligence terminal. Probably it's the persistence and continuity and stubbornness of persisting year after 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 year in keeping a record of my mentality or mental images and epiphanous experiences or odd, ordinary mind, day-to-day, whatever I wait, day-to-day facts or pictures. Whenever I wake up in the middle of my life and I'm aware that, oh, yeah, I noticed something. I noticed that dream, or I noticed that it's snowing out, or I noticed that there's snow on the fire escape, or I noticed that there's a half moon above St. Mark's churchyard steeple. So whenever I notice something, and notice that I notice it, and also notice it strongly enough to write it down, that's my art life, or that's my poetry life. It's a very simple process, basically. And my day revolves around making free space so that I can get to a camera or a notebook or a piano when I have an idea, or maybe a tape machine. So that I always have some way, if I have a melody in the middle of the night, I can get at this tape machine and turn it on and da 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 da, so that I don't forget it by the morning. Because with dreams and also with waking moment noticings, waking mind, daily noticings, very often that material is ephemeral, though very strong at the instant. But the impressions, though very strong and vivid at the instant, might fade, or get buried under doing your taxes, if it's early April, or get buried under making love, or get buried under cooking spaghetti, or get buried under studying for an exam, or getting busted or something. So the question is, can you be consistently aware of the fact that the main task is to record your consciousness?
So what part of your notebooks and journals do we see published in your books of poetry?
Something that looks hot.
What percentage would that be? I mean,
Oh,
is it
1%.
Uh-huh.
0.5%. I write, every day something or other, and then maybe something's usable, and something. It's like a sketch. He does a sketch, and maybe once a week you get something good.
So how do you...
It's very relaxed. It isn't like this big thing of, you're going to take a thunderbolt and throw it at Zeus, except once in a while. But that comes on its own. Zeusian thunderbolts come on their own. You can't call them up. They're a product of circumstance and time and history and yourself and your metabolism and your love affairs and your money and your lack of money and your food and your drugs and your shoes and your Brooks Brothers and your Empire State Building and the winter snow and your mother's living death or something. So you can't combine all those things by your own. You have to wait for nature to throw up a great wave.
And do you know when you've been hit by a thunderbolt?
Yeah, you can tell almost instantly. It's a sort of subtle matter. It's a slow thunderbolt.
I mean, do you finish a poem and you say, this one is a good one?
Yes, I finished White Shroud and thought, yes, this is obviously a gift from the god Hades.
Why the god Hades?
Well, it was about seeing the shadow of my mother in Hades. And it was a long conversation with my long-dead mother.
And how did you go about writing White Shroud?
Oh, I just woke up from a dream. I realized it was an extraordinary dream because of the feeling in my body of joy and bliss and illumination and relief at having seen my mother again and having finally had a chance to talk to her and reconcile with her, and her in such funny shape as an old bag lady in the West Bronx. White Shroud. I was horrified a little. Who'd take care of such a woman? Familiar. Half neglected on her street, except she'd weathered many years' snowy oblivion, stubborn, tough in a moth-eaten rabbit fur hat. She had tooth troubles, teeth too old, ground down like horse molars. She opened her mouth to display her gorge. How can she live with that? How eat, I thought. Mushroom-like gray-white horseshoe of incisors she chomped with, hard, flat flowers ranged round her gums. Then I recognized she was my mother, Naomi, habiting this old city-edged corner, older than I knew her before her life disappeared. What are you doing here? I asked, amazed she recognized me still, astounded to see her sitting up even, on her own, survived to greet me, mocking. I'm living alone. You all abandoned me. I'm a great woman. I came here by myself. I wanted to live. Now I'm too old to take care of myself. I don't care. What are you doing here? I was looking for a house, I thought. She has one in poor Bronx. Needs someone to help her shop and cook. Needs her children now. I'm her younger son. Walked past her alley by accident. But here she is, survived, sleeping awake on that wooden platform. Has she an extra room? I noticed her cave adjoined a one-room apartment door, unpainted basement storeroom, facing her shelter in the building side. I could live here, worst comes to worst. Best place I'll find, near my mother in our mortal life. My years of haunting continental city streets, apartment dreams, old rooms I used to live in, still paid rent for, homeless, keys didn't work, locks changed, emigre families occupied my familiar hallway lodgings. I'd wandered down hill avenues, lost, money gone. I come back home, I couldn't recognize houses in London, Paris, Bronx, by Columbia Library, downtown 8th Avenue near the Chelsea subway. Those years, unsettled, were over now. Here I could live forever. Here have a home with Naomi. At long last, at long, long last, my search was ended in this pleasant way. Time to care for her before death. Long way to go yet. Lots of trouble. Her cantankerous habits. Shameful blankets near the street. Tooth pots. Dirty pans. Half paralyzed. Stubborn. She needed my middle-aged strength and worldly money knowledge. Housekeeping. Art. I can cook and write books for a living. She'll not have to beg her medicine food. A new set of teeth for company. Won't yell at the world. I can afford a telephone. After 25 years, we could call up Aunt Edie in California. I'll have a place to stay. Best of all, I told Naomi. Now, don't get mad. You realize your old enemy, Grandma's still alive. She lives a couple blocks downhill. I just saw her, like you. My breast rejoiced. All my troubles over. She was content, too old to care or yell her grudge, only complaining her bad teeth. What long-sought peace. Then, glad of life, I woke in Boulder before dawn, my second-story bedroom windows, Bluff Street facing east over town rooftops. I returned from the land of the dead to living poesy and wrote this tale of mine joy to have seen my mother again. And when the ink ran out of my pen and rosy violet illumined city treetop skies above the flat iron front range, I went downstairs to the shady living room where Peter Orlovsky sat with long hair lit by television glow to watch the sunrise, weather news. I kissed him and filled my pen and wept.
This is PBS.